So people are still joining. Shall I wait for a couple of minutes or?
No, you can start.
Okay. Okay, so welcome to the ninth session of this workshop. And this is the last session before the discussion. And in this discussion, in this session, we have three talks. One invited talk by Professor Anjan Anand Sen. He is currently now in Ahmedabad University, and before he was at Center for Theoretical Physics at Jamia Millia. And then the second talk will be delivered by Chandrakant. Sorry, check. Yeah, Chandrachur Das from BITS Pilani. The third talk will be given by Urvashi from IIT PUG. So Anjanda, you have 30 minutes for your talk.
Okay.
And 10 minutes for the discussion.
Sure.
So I will remind you at 25 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So you can start now, Anjanda.
Okay. Is it visible to everybody?
Yeah, it is visible to me.
Okay, I believe it is. Everybody can see it. Okay, fine. Okay, thank you, Kanan, and thank you, the organizer, for invited me to giving this talk. So I'll be discussing about the cosmology with H1 21 centimeter observations. Means the scope of doing cosmology through H1 21 centimeter observation, and more specifically through SK, is enormous. And frankly speaking, I am not much aware of all the cosmological aspects of this H1 21 centimeter observations. Okay, so I have done a few works or related works with what can be done through H1 21 centimeter observation, particularly through SK, related to mostly through dark energy and modification of gravity. So I will concentrate on that mostly, but before that I will give a very brief review or what can be done actually. Okay. So just before going to the SK, let's see what the current knowledge we have after we have the Planck data or the Planck measurement. Okay, so this is the cosmology after Planck 2018. This is the vanilla concordance lambda CDF model, and so we know that now with the Planck 2018 data together with the BAO data. And also, if you can add other data from supernova or large-scale structures, this 6-parameter lambda CDM concordance cosmology is a very well-constrained model. It is mostly consistent with most of the observations, and these are the kind of numbers that you can get. Interestingly, just with these 6 parameters that we have at the upper half, we can actually describe the full universe, starting from the inflation till the present day, so that from the inflationary time till now we have this dark energy dominated universe. So with only these 6 parameters, you can actually describe most of the observation, including the Planck. Okay, and then from that we have some derived parameter. Okay, like the Hubble constant at present, the sigma normalization, the omega m and omega lambda. Okay, so that is the present situation. And if you want to go a little bit beyond this concordance lambda CDM model, and you allow the dark energy to vary, and most of the time we use it, this model, this variation of dark energy, what is called the CPL parametrization, which is written over here. It is a 2-parameter parametrization. Then the constraint on the dark energy that you get is like this. Okay. And as you can see, the lambda CDM is pretty much consistent with the data. Means like just to give a little perspective, because as you can see that if you just use only Planck data, Okay, if you don't add any information from BAO or supernova or this redshift space distortion or weak lensing, then as you can see, the lambda CDM is a little bit out from the 2 sigma of what you get from the Planck. But as we add the other information from the Planck or supernova, so lambda CD is pretty much in, fine. But what you can also see that as you add more parameter, the parameter space in the dark energy behavior get a bit long, means like you get a more behavior that is allowed. And interestingly, what you can see that this region that you have this quadrant, this is the non-phantom behavior for the dark energy in a sense that the W is always greater than -1. And, oh, sorry. So this is the non-phantom behavior. And as you can see, the non-phantom behavior is hugely constrained by all these observations, fine? So if it is not a cosmological constant, then having a non-phantom kind of dark energy is not very easy, because your model has to be extremely fine-tuned to be within this small region that you can have over here. This is a very small region over here, fine. On the other hand, the phantom part is much more bigger, so it is much easy to have a phantom model that is consistent with the data, okay? But again, this is the lambda CDM is perfectly okay. So if you are okay with the lambda CDM, then obviously this question doesn't arise that whether you go to phantom or non-phantom. But why we want to see that that we want to go beyond lambda CDM? There are few things, like this is likely just to see that this is the distance measurement. The D is basically this angular diameter distance, and it is divided by the R drag for the baryon acoustic scale. And what has been plotted over here, it is that for any data that we have and normalized by the Planck value. And this gray region is basically what the Planck actually means like you have. So it is the constraint on the Planck, fine, from the Planck. And these are the different data points that you can get from different experiments, or mostly from the different galaxy surveys. And as you can see that there is one point that is quite outlier, or means quite different from what you get from this Planck behavior or the lambda CDM behavior, is the Bose-Lyman alpha point that you can have, fine. Obviously, there are questions that whether this measurement is quite robust measurement or not. But still, there is at least one measurement that we have, which is not consistent with what we have from the Planck result, fine. So that is one initial tension that is there coming from the lambda CDM model. There are other. So if you want to see that this S8 parameter is basically this coming from the weak lensing, okay. So the shear that we have from the weak lensing, that is actually proportional to this S8 parameter, okay. And this parameter, now if you can get this measured value from different galaxy surveys or weak lensing surveys like KIDS, Viking, or DES, then you can see that those measurements are actually a kind of a little bit in tension with the Planck measurement. The Planck measurement is this orange measurement, and this is roughly around 2.4, 2.5 sigma kind of tension between those results coming from different lensing observation and that with the Planck, fine. So even if this tension is not that big, but still there is some amount of inconsistency that you have for a lambda CDM model for this kind of measurement, okay. But the biggest measure, that tension that is coming actually is what is now we call the Hubble tension, okay. So as you can see that here, what has been plotted is the Hubble parameter normalized by the redshift. So this very tiny or this very thin gray region, or the black or gray region, is basically what you get from the Planck 2018, assuming a lambda CDM model. And then this blue line that you have here, this blue point and the error bar, this is coming from the resector, okay. as you can see clearly that there is a huge discrepancy between these two measurements. That what Planck says, because Planck actually doesn't kind of constrain the present day, fine. So what you actually constrain the CMB at the last scattering, and then you assuming a lambda CDM, and then you actually evolve it to the present day at Z equal to 0, then whatever the value of H that you get at Z equal to 0, that value is actually inconsistent with the local measurement by different supernovas by Riesig-Tal, okay? And the numbers, if you look at the numbers are pretty different. So that is the number that you can get from the Planck measurement, okay, which is around 67. And then this measurement by the Hubble Space Telescope with different supernovas with different calibrations, mostly by Cepheid calibration, that number is around 74. And these two values are roughly 4.4 sigma inconsistent, okay? So that is currently the biggest tension that the lambda CDM model has. And this is not only from that, even if you take the strong lensing data, that number is also, okay, the error bars is higher, but still that number is much more consistent with the Hubble, with the Riesig-Tal value rather than the lambda, the value we're assuming a lambda CDM from Planck, fine? But there's another independent measurement by the Carnegie Mellon group, which is Friedman et al. And they actually do a defined calibration for those supernovas. They use the TRGB, the tip of the red giant branch of the galaxy. That's calibrations they use. And they get a value which is actually much more consistent with the value that the Planck get, fine? So there is a bit of kind of a inconsistency, different results. But if you means like if you take these numbers from Riesig-Tal or the strong lensing, and then you compare with the Planck value, then there is a sufficient tension, and people are now taking this tension more seriously. Hopefully, in near future, the data coming from different other experiments or other observations can shed more light in this tension. But as of now, lambda CDM, even if the Planck actually is, or the BA or supernova, they are much more consistent with the lambda CDM measurement. But this is one very sticking point that is there for this lambda CDM model about this Hubble tension, right? So given this perspective that you have, and there are other cosmological means, like still we don't know, because now after the Planck, still we don't know whether the inflation is a single field inflation model, because most of the sort of kind of potential that you can think of, they are not very much consistent with what the Planck constants are, okay? So that is another sticking issue coming from the very primordial fluctuations, right? So means with this sort of a background, so we need to introduce what is called the square kilometer array. It's a radio telescope. It is a project. It's a next generation and radio observatory. It has a huge collecting area, okay, and they have a two telescope of that. One is the Dish array, which is based in the South Africa. And another is the array of dipole antenna that is called SK-LOW. This is based in Australia. And the whole observation is based on the detection of the neutral hydrogen emission of the 21 centimeter line. Okay. Now, just a little bit about that. So what is this 21 centimeter line? So we know that there is a hyperfine transition or hyperwave transition in the atomic hydrogen. So there is this electron and proton, that there is an interaction between the electron and proton spin. There are two states. In one state, this electron spin and proton spin, they are parallel. We call it a triplet state. And in the lower state, which is a single state, where these spins are actually anti-parallel. Okay. And then there is a transition between these two states. And that actually emits a 21 centimeter line. Okay. So that is the basic physics about this 21 centimeter emission. And so these are the rest rate frequency of 1420 megahertz. The wavelength is 21 centimeter. It is in the radio. Okay. And and then if we have this radio telescope, the SK, they actually want to detect this line, fine. And the advantage of having this kind of a radio astronomy is that the radio observation can see actually these objects which are at large distances, but they are very faint, but still they are at the large distances because they are not scattered by large amount of dust particle in the galaxy, in the galactic gas, right? And also there are large number of sources that we have. They are very luminous, means they emit in the radios, okay? So that is the goal to observe in the 21 centimeter. So as a cosmological probe, so what we do actually, so our main goal is to observe this 21 centimeter line, and this is actually observed as a measured intensity of this brightness temperature of this 21 centimeter light, okay, or this neutral hydrogen, okay. So and observationally, we have this brightness temperature. We have to relate it some background temperature, which is the CMB. Most of the time we use, okay, and that is actually the excess brightness temperature that we talk about, and then we construct the power spectrum for this brightness temperature, okay. So this is roughly the expression for the brightness temperature, and as you can see, so this depends upon the neutral fraction. This is X H1. Okay, it depends upon the over density, the baryonic over density, the density field that you have. Okay, it also depends upon the peculiar velocity field that is over there, and also it depends upon the Hubble parameter. Right. So if in a regime when you have this this TS is the spin temperature and the TCMB is the CMB temperature. So in a region when this spin temperature is much higher than the CMB temperature, which is basically from around Z20 or something, or beyond the cosmic dawn and the reionization epoch, then the brightness temperature fluctuation is mostly depending on the linear density field, the delta B, the peculiar density field, or the gradient of the peculiar velocity field, and also the Hubble parameter, fine. And then the cosmology enters to this 21 centimeter signal through the dependence of all these quantities, the density field, the velocity gradient, or the background expansion, and all those cosmologies are included in all these things, fine. So observing the power spectrum of this brightness temperature fluctuation, we can actually can do a lot of cosmology from here, because all these quantities like delta B, the delta VR, or the Hubble parameter, they are encoded with a lot of cosmological information. Okay, but the challenge is that that you need to actually disentangle the gastrophysics, because all these things, means observing all these 21 centimeter physics, they are involved with a lot of and their observation, they involve a lot of effect of galaxies and other cosmological sources on the neutral hydrogen. So to get the information about this cosmological about the cosmology, or and get this thing to constant different fundamental physics like dark energy or inflation or other thing, then this is very important that that one has to disentangle this astrophysical effects, right? And this is not always very easy. So that is the challenge, but I hope this can be actually done. Okay. So given that we have a good understanding of this gastrophysics, so we can have several routes for cosmology, because we know that this 21 centimeter is actually is depending upon this density field or the peculiar velocity field. So they are actually the tracer of the density or peculiar velocity field, as well as the dependence on background cosmology. So one can actually constant the cosmological parameter jointly, taking the 21 centimeter observation through SK and jointly with other observations like CMB or galaxy surveys and other. One can, because these are all the information of the density fields are there. So in principle, one can study the non-Gaussianic feature in the galaxy distribution. One can study the feature of the warm dark matter in the density field. Means one can take this 21 centimeter as a diffuse background source like CMB. One can also study the ISW effect as well as the weak lensing. Okay. one can use these things, and with the CMB, one can use this 21 centimeter observation to break the degeneracy between the optical depth to the CMB and with the neutrino mass. Okay. Then there are also possibly, there are a lot of scope to test the inflation, like the primordial fluctuation. One can study, one can test one can constant the primordial non-Gaussianity much better way. One can very precisely measure the power spectrum. Fine. Also through the power spectrum measurement and the running of the different the spectral index, one can actually get information about the primordial black hole physics also. Okay. The next is basically there's a lot of scope to study the dark energy. Okay. Not only to the background evolution, but also to the density field, because of those density field and their evolution, they have they encode the information of the dark energy behavior. Okay. So from this galaxy surveys, one can actually measure the baryonic acoustic oscillation, depth fluctuation, and from the baryonic acoustic oscillation measurement, and also to the redshift distortion measurement. One can do the distance relation. One can actually constant the growth indexes. Okay. And also at the same time putting constant on the dark energy. The other aspect that I will discuss a little bit is basically what is the probing the ultra large scale, so that the probing the scales beyond the horizon scale, when the general relativistic effects are much more prominent. And probing those scales is very important for both dark energy and modification of gravity, because at the small scale, we actually the behavior the dependence of the dark energy and modification of gravity comes only mostly through the background behavior. But at ultra large scale, the dark energy, we cannot ignore the perturbation of the dark energy, and the effect of modification of gravity is also very prominent at the horizon scale and beyond. So if one can probe this ultra large scale, then one can get much better understanding about the dark energy behavior or the modification of gravity behavior. And it seems that it is possible with the 21 centimeter observation. So I will mostly concentrate, as I said, not all those things. I mostly concentrate on the dark energy behavior, or the dark constant of the dark energy, or the Bayer measurement and the distance relation, and also the probing the ultra large scale. Okay, so so how to model means to constant this dark energy and modified gravity with 21 centimeter. Most of the time we model the dark energy, as I said, as a CPL behavior. So the behavior of the dark energy is modeled like this kind of a, okay, so this has to be not WJ, this has to be WA. Sorry, I'm very sorry for that. Okay, so this is a sort of a very linear behavior of the equation of state, and the modeling the modification of gravity comes to these two gravitational potential that we have, and in standard GR, these two gravitational potential phi and psi, they are equal. So and this mu is actually 1. So you get the normal perturbation equation for the GR. Fine. Otherwise, when they are not equal, then your these two gravitational potential evolve like this way. Okay. Most of the time, for the small scale effect, people assume, to make things simple, that this mu and this gamma, they assume that they are scale independent, and they actually behave on the dark energy, or they depends upon the dark energy in the following way that I have been written. So it is dependent on the dark energy, on the dark energy density, as a dark energy density. Okay. So that is the kind of, this is a standard practice in CMB also, in Planck also, when they constant the modification of gravity, they do the same thing. So actually now what they do is that they try to constant this mu naught and gamma naught parameter space. Okay. So as you can see, if mu naught and gamma naught is 0, both are 0, then mu and gamma are both 1, and you go to the general relativity. So the idea is to check that whether the mu naught and gamma naught actually deviate from 0 or not. So that is the GR limit actually. Okay. So with this kind of a modification, we means one needs to see that how from the 21 centimeter, or from how SK means how, at what extent XK can constant both the dark energy and the modification of gravity. Now there are different surveys are there in SK. So one is the SK mid with 2 bands. One is the band 1 and the band 2. The band 2 actually mostly for the continuum weak lensing surveys and the H1 galaxy redshift surveys. They go up to redshift 0.4, 0.5. And there's another band 1 that is basically mostly that will for the wide continuum galaxy surveys and the H1 intensity mapping survey. Okay. And that redshift range goes from around 0.3, 0.4 up to redshift 3. Okay. And one use, there's also the SK1 lows, that thing. Means here I will not discuss that much. So I'll discuss mostly these different observations that you can actually use these two band, SK mid band 1 and SK mid band 2, where they are mostly we use this weak lensing, the intensity mapping, and the galaxy redshift service. Okay. So this is actually what you get with weak lensing continuum survey using the
Ananda, you have 5 minutes.
I have 5 minutes. Okay. 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 So that is what you can get. I may take extra 5 minutes. Okay. So that is what you get from the weak lensing continuum survey. And as you can see, there is this, it is compared with the dark energy surveys. And as you can see in both cases, for both W0, WA and gamma naught and mu naught parameter space, roughly you get the kind of a equivalent what you get from the DES, right? So the XK is roughly the same order kind of constant that you can make, that you can get with the DES. But as you put the Planck constant, okay, if you put the Planck prior, then you can see that you can actually what you get from only SK and DS. But if you put the Planck prior, you can constant the W0, WA parameters in a much precise way. Okay. This is actually coming with the H1 Galaxy surveys, also with the SK mid 2, assuming that you have this, you can measure the baryon acoustic oscillation peak, and also you can do the redshift space distortion, fine. So there are two things that have been done over here. One is the Galaxy surveys coming with the SK mid 2, the band 2, and also the H1 intensity mapping survey, okay. And as you can see, that these are the kind of constant you get from different parameters. These are constant in the leftmost. You can get the constant on the Hubble parameter that you can get, what kind of constant that you can get. And as you can see that one the good point of the SK is that at a very small redshift you can actually it can give some good constant actually. Okay. For the F sigma, it also it can give, because these dots are basically the current constant. And as you can see that the small redshift, the SK can actually do much better than the current constant. Okay, and same for the angular diameter distance. Okay. Now what I will do, I will show that using this constant on this Hubble parameter, one can actually means in future can do a very good study of the Hubble tension. So that I will discuss. Okay. This is the same because if you do this redshift space distortion, it depends upon the F, the growth parameter, and the growth parameter is actually if you have a modified gravity model, the growth parameter has a very good dependence on the modified gravity model. So with using the redshift space distortion, you actually can constant the modified gravity model a bit better. And as you can see that in this case, what has been shown with the comparison with the Planck and the DES. With the and the Planck and the SK, and as you can see, the SK is not doing very good, but it is basically complementary to what you get from the DES at much lower redshift. Okay, so that's you can get on the modification of gravity. Okay, you can also do these Galaxy surveys to do the void statistics, and that has been shown over here for a dark energy model. And as you can see, this SK and the Planck, they are complementary to each other. Okay. But if you combine them, then you can actually have a very good constant on the W0 and W. Okay, so that is these are all you can do actually for the dark energy behavior and the modification of gravity. Then I just said that because me, Tirthankar and Bikash Dinda, one of our students, we did a work a bit few years ago. Unfortunately, we didn't kind of go through fully. So we use the H1 21 centimeter intensity mapping survey with the SK mid 1 kind of sort of thing. And what we did is that in general, people only take the CPL, but we take on also the different other parameterization and try to see that how far one can do. One can constant the different dark energy parameter with different equation of state behavior. What we actually see that most of the time, as you can see, this green line is the CPL kind of thing. So most of the time in all SK kind of forecasting, people use the CPL kind of parameterization. But what we showed is that there are other parameterizations are possible where that can actually have a much better constant on the dark energy behavior. So as you can see, there's a parameterization called BA parameterization. Okay, so which can have a, it's just to show that CPL parameterization may not always be very good to do all this forecasting. So there may be better parameterization which can actually make much more better constant on the dark energy behavior. So that is that we showed with the H1 21 centimeter power spectrum. Now, just to tell about this H0 tension with the SK, as I told you earlier, so this I don't go. So as I told you earlier that they have a, so one can actually use this different HK intensity mapping survey or the galaxy survey to get a constant on the H. Fine. So what these people have done, this Bengali, Clarkson, and Martin, they use that kind of error, which one can get the SK intensity mapping survey. And then they took the two fiducial model. In one case, they use the fiducial H0 value for the R19, and another case, the fiducial H0 value for the P18. Both cases, the forecast error is basically coming from what you get from the SK intensity mapping survey. And then they reconstruct the H, okay? And then extrapolate to Z equal to 0 and try to see that what kind of tension that you can get, okay? Means with this kind of thing, with the SK kind of error bar, okay? So this is the because this is the kind of data that you can get for HZ, okay? From HSK mid intensity mapping, both from band 1 and band 2. So one can actually go from redshift 0.1 up to redshift 3, okay? So this is now this result that as you can see, this purple line and this green line, these are actually error bar for the Planck and the error bar for the R19. So individually, as you can see, the black one is basically, this pink line is basically for the Euclid, and this black one and this red one is for different bands. But actually, if you can combine these two bands, okay, then you can get much better constant on H0. And that constant is comparable to the constant that you can get from the Planck, okay? And how you can, means what kind of tension you can get? As you can see, currently the tension is around 4.4 sigma. So if you can get a kind of a error bar like SK, okay, from intensity mapping, the tension can go actually much more than that, okay? So as you can see, the number that you can go, the tension can go up to around 5.5 sigma or around that, around 5.5, 5.4 sigma, right? So what you can, so this actually gives that the SK kind of, this kind of observation with the intensity mapping thing with different band, you can get a much pretty, better constant on H0, okay? And that actually can tell you, about this tension in a much better way, okay? So that is one very good, interesting work that I found. So that is the thing. So these are the current constants that you can have, and this blue and this red one basically what you can get, assuming a fiducial P18 or a fiducial R19, and you can see the error bar is much smaller than the other kind of H0 measurement that you can get. Now, Kanon, how much time I have, or I have completely exhausted the time?
You can maybe you can finish in 2 minutes.
Okay, so I just at the end I just want to talk about this the prospect that you can have to probe the ultra large scale with SK. So this is a kind of plot that I borrowed from one talk by Phil Bull, and as you can see that with SK you can actually go very pretty large scale. Okay, that is possible. Okay. And at this very large scale, what you want to be is what you actually said that I told you earlier, that there the general relativistic effects are much more prominent. So you have to take the full relativistic perturbation, and there the perturbation coming from the dark energy or the modification of gravity that comes into play, and there are also other general relativistic effects. Fine. So just to see that how far one can get the deviation from the lambda CDM, we consider two Lagrangian, with the cubic Galilean, and one is the dBi Lagrangian. Okay, one is the dBi Lagrangian, and just to show that for the dBi Lagrangian, these are the kind of numbers that you can get for different potential, and what has been plotted is the deviation from the lambda CDM with a full generally means the galaxy over density. Taking into account all the generativistic correction that you can get, fine. And as you can see that around means like the value that you can have, this kind of kind of region that you can have over here from 10 to the power -3 to 10 to the power -4, around that region, the deviation from the lambda CDM can be pretty high up to redshift 1, fine. So you can have a deviation up to 10% or means 7, 8, 10% kind of deviation that you can get. So that is it. That means that is so is a much more easier way. If you can measure this deviation, it is much more easier way that you can distinguish between different dark energy model. Okay. So the problem with that measurement at the ultra large scales are limited by the cosmic variance. But now people are talking about that with a multi-tracer techniques like what has been proposed by Seljack, one can actually overcome this kind of problem. This is the problem coming from cosmic variance. And there is a work by Fonseca et al. Where they are using the H1 intensity mapping survey and the Euclid Light Galaxy surveys with a multi-tracer techniques, and then show that with this kind of multi-tracer technique, if you just combine these two things, one can actually tackle this cosmic variance problem with a much more better way. Okay. So that's the summaries that I want to take, that there's a huge scope for cosmology from SK, and obviously I cannot talk all of this. Just here the few things that I found interesting, which is related to my work that I discussed. One is that what drives the daytime acceleration for the universe, what is the dark energy behavior, and means also the SK can shed much more light on the Hubble tension, because they can measure this H0 much precisely with a small, very small error bar. And also if we can probe these ultra large scales with the SK, with this tackling the cosmic variance problem with the multi-tracer techniques, that can actually give a much more better way to understand the dark energy, because there are much more information are encoded at very large scale. So thank you for your attention, and stay safe and take care for this situation. Thank you very
much. Thank you, Anjanda. So now it's time for questions. Please press raise hand button. Okay, Prasoon.
Yeah, Anjanda, I was just wondering if there is any method which can distinguish between a FR gravity model with the corresponding dark energy model.
Okay, so one thing is one thing is there with this redshift space distortion, because okay, I can just stay a moment. So here, as you can see, this mu naught and gamma naught, these parameters are actually, if you have a FR gravity model, so you can actually relate this mu naught and gamma naught with the FR gravity models. Okay, so any kind of deviation from the general relativity can be actually encoded in mu naught and gamma. So you can effectively write down that how these gravitational potential are behaving through this mu naught and gamma naught from the FR gravity. And then if you see that now, if you as I said, that this mu naught and gamma naught, okay, so their number, if they are deviating from 0, that actually is basically that you are actually having a deviation from the general relativity. So in a sense that if you use this, one uses this redshift space distortion, because that will measure this growth parameter, and the growth parameter depends upon this gravitational potential if you have a modification of gravity. So that is one way. The other way, through any background evolution, you cannot detect it, because you can always have a FR gravity model which is a corresponding equation of space, so the same background equation. So it's possible. The other thing is that I have not shown, we are actually working on it to calculate this gravitational, means the galaxy over density for this FR gravity model. Okay, what I showed over here for a particular Lagrangian, which is this Lagrangian, which is a tachyon Lagrangian, or this kind of Lagrangian is a cubic Galilean Lagrangian, and we studied the deviation. This can be the same thing can be done for the FR gravity that we are doing now. And then if we can probe that kind of scale, around this kind of scale that you can see with intensity mapping surveys or with multi-tracer techniques, then maybe one can actually probe also, or distinguish the FR gravity from standard.
So what tells that if I have a dark energy model, I cannot have a corresponding FR model? Because if I just isolate
when I'm saying a dark energy model means see that obviously a dark energy model cannot be represented by the FR gravity. I am only saying that at the background evolution. Okay, so perturbative level, obviously these two models are different because in FR gravity model, obviously the two gravitational potentials are not the same. And in the standard GR, these are two phi and psi's are the same because there is no anisotropic stress. Right? What I'm saying is that if you have a FR gravity model, just for a background expansion, I can always write down a corresponding dark energy model with an equation of state. Maybe this equation of state is a very weird, and for that you need a scalar field, which is a very, very, very complicated potential. But what I'm saying that you can always write it as far as the background cosmology is concerned.
Okay. So perturbation level it is always different.
Perturbation level there is always the difference. So the goal is just to check it at the perturbation level. At the background level, you cannot distinguish.
Okay.
Yeah, Prabha, please ask your question.
Yeah. Hi, Anjan.
Yes.
So I know that you did not speak much about the primordial part, but I was wondering if you have some numbers for example, if you want to constrain the primordial spectral index, scalar spectral index, by using SKA data, how much improvement would be there to the Planck values?
Okay.
Would it really improve, or will those be washed out by?
What I can say, I don't have the plot currently, but what I can say that if I can remember currently, let's say this alpha s beta s parameter, fine. One is the first derivative of this NS, the other is the second derivative of the NS. So if I can remember correctly, that what people have checked with the SK phase 1, there can be in the parameter space, there can be considerable reduction in that parameter space. Okay.
I see.
The numbers exactly, because I can share you the plot later on, but if I can remember correctly, that if you have Planck, whatever you get for alpha s beta s parameter space, if you add, let's say, SK kind of phase 1, let's say that kind of thing, then you can considerably reduce or make that parameter space much smaller.
Okay, so the running will be constrained.
Running will be very much constrained actually, and that actually is important because with a that kind of running, you actually can affect your primordial black hole production.
Yes, so yeah, smaller scale compared to CMB.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Professor Desai, please ask your question.
Yes, sorry. So I just joined 10 minutes ago because I was in another meeting. So apologies if you mentioned this earlier. So, but I think your talk was about cosmology prospects with SK, broadly speaking. So my question is, can SK say something about measuring the dipole component of the cosmic accelerations, which is what Subir Sarkar and collaborators have been arguing?
I think that one of the goals of the SK is actually to see that whether the universe is homogeneous and isotropic, right? And so that they may study. I'm not very much aware, but I think there's one of the goals is that, right? So in a sense that it actually try to see that whether the assumption that you do, this cosmological principle, that the universe is homogeneous and isotropic at cosmological scale, I think the SK can probe that, fine. So if SK can probe that kind of thing, I think obviously that can actually answer your question, that because those cosmic dipoles that you have, and that can explain this acceleration that what this solution is explaining. Is basically that the assumption that we have a homogeneous and isotropic universe is actually not true, and that's why maybe that is the wrong assumption. That's why we are seeing actually a cosmic acceleration. So probably SK can do in that direction, but exactly I am not very familiar with those numbers at this
moment. Okay, can you take up this discussion in Slack channel because we are running late?
Okay, fine. Okay, sure.
Sorry for that.
Okay, sure.
So Thank you, Anjanda, for your talk and the discussion. So the next talk is by...
Thank you.
Yeah. Next talk is by Chandrachud Das. Chandrachud, are you there?
Hello. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. So can you start sharing your slides?
Yeah, sure. So is it now visible?
Yes, it's visible. Yes. So you can start now. You have 15 minutes for your talk and then 5 minutes for the discussion. So I will remind you after 13 minutes. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chandrachud from BITS Pilani, and I'm going to talk about my recent research with my collaborators on probing FR gravity using post-reionization HI21 centimeter signal, which we recently submitted in Physical Review, and the online version of this article you can find in this given archive number. So here is the brief outline of my talk. I will talk about a very basic introduction to the dark energy and the modified gravity models. Then I will talk about the cosmology with FR gravity, and we'll see the imprint of FR gravity with using on post-reionization HI21 centimeter signal. Then finally, I will show some interesting result using a SKA-1 mid telescope. Okay, so the most and one of the most exciting and surprising observational discovery that in modern cosmology that our universe is currently in accelerated expansion phase, and the source of such the late time cosmic acceleration was dubbed by just named as dark energy. So the idea of dark energy was introduced by Albert Einstein in 1917 from the idea of the classical theory of gravity, general relativity, and the cosmological constant can be thought of a fluid which have a equation of state of W, which is a dimensionless number, and exactly equal to -1, which can be thought of as a constant energy density in the space time. And there are several many observations then found that cosmological constant is a good approximation of the describing the late time cosmic acceleration, but there is so many observations that we can claims that the dark energy is in the cosmological constant is not exactly -1, but it's very we found there is some deviation of that constant energy density in space time, and the simplest kind of looking at the modification of modifying the equation of state is look at the modification to the Einstein's gravity. And the idea of modifying the Einstein's gravity is to look at the effect of cosmic acceleration without requiring any exotic field, which is like a cosmological constant. So I will talk about only one kind of modeling of FR gravity, which is FR gravity. Okay, I'm sorry. So can you, sir, look at my slide is changing or not? Currently, I'm in 4.
So slide number is not visible. Oh, yes. So yes, we can see your slide number 4 now.
Okay. So thank you. There is I'm working on a specific kind of modified gravity theory, which is FR gravity. So the idea is to look at go back to the Einstein-Hilbert action and replace the Ricci scalar R by some general function of f of R, and Sm is the standard metal action. Once we have the action, we can start varying the action with respect to the dynamical variable g in mu. So we'll get an equation of motion which is similar type of Einstein's field equation, or it's called modified Einstein field equation in equation of 2. So if you look at the equation 2, if we substitute the f of R equals simple R minus 2 lambda, we can reduce the equation 2 to the standard Einstein field equation. So now once you have this equation of motion, we assumed a spatial flat and matter of relativistic matter and radiation, will get a equation of motion like Einstein field equation, and the trace of the equation of FRW metric in equation 3. The convenient way to work in this equation, so introduce these four dimensionless variable x1, x2, and x3, x4. Once you have this equation, you can go to the, you can write this equation 3 in these four coupled differential equation, x1 and x1 prime, x2 prime, and x3 prime, x4 prime. This prime denotes the logarithmic derivative with respect, derivative with respect to the log a. So once you have all these four set of autonomous dynamical equation, so and the solution of this coupled ODE now can be mapped to the FR gravity theory and the dark energy, and study the dynamics of the energy density parameters. And now once we have this effective equation of state, now the Hubble's expansion rate can be modified by this equation of 6. So far, we have not assumed any functional form of f of r. However, the functional form of f of r is highly constant from the solar system tests, and choosing the FR model is is phenomenologically satisfactory. It should be mimic the lambda CDM model at a high redshift, because very tight constants from CMB observation, and the expansion rate should be closer to lambda CDM at very redshift. So we choose a specific kind of functional form given by Hu-Saoki in equation 7. So mu is the only non-negative dimensionless parameter of this model, and RC the present Ricci scalar. Now, if you look at the functional form of f of r, it's rapidly approaches to f of r to r minus mu RC at very high curvature limit, and exactly like a cosmological constant. So the quantity of the real quantity of interest is not functional form of FR. While the idea of measuring the modified gravity is to find what is the deviation from the lambda CDM model, and that deviation can be found from the first derivative of f of r given this functional form. So now thing is, people ask what is the present day value of f of r, which is the f of r naught. In order to recover the standard GR result in solar system test, is the f of r value is constant, that it should be less than 10 to the minus 6, and we also assume that f of r, which is second derivative of functional form, must be greater than 0 in order to avoid the ghost and tachyonic condition. So in our work, we have adopted that the f of r naught value is of 10 to the minus 5 from this study of a peak abundance study, that they found that this f of r naught value is constant in this parameter range. So we'll choose that f of r naught value is 10 to the minus 5, and we'll look into the power spectrum. And so at least in the background level, you can distinguish these modified gravity levels, gravity models, and from lambda CDM. However, the unique way to look possibility that to constant all these models is to look into the large scale structure of cosmic structure. So in the linear perturbation regime, in very soft horizon approximation, where the matter perturbation is dictated by this following differential equation, where G effective is very unlike lambda CDM model. So G effective is called effective Newtonian gravitational constant, which is related to Newtonian constant by a complex form of f of given f of r. So if f of r is simple r minus 2 lambda is simple, all this expression which goes off and will reduce to get back to the Newtonian constant, gravitational constant. So because the G effective is now a scale dependent function, the growth structures and of the growth of the cosmic structure now introduces a unique feature of the scale dependent of growth. So that scale dependent of growth, however, mostly used to distinguish this structure formation beyond the standard cosmological model. So the quantity of interest is something called growth rate, which is the logarithmic derivative of the perturbation with respect to the logarithm derivative, log A. And this figure that we have shown is the deviation from the cosmological deviation of growth rate of FR theory of fiducial value 10 to -5 from lambda CDM model. Here we can see that the effect is smaller in very low, high redshift and also in very small redshift. And the most peak will arise around redshift 1. And the typical departure you can see from the K window is in redshift window from 0.5 to 1.5 of order of 12%. So we choose this redshift 1 as the fiducial redshift trend and look into the observed 21 centimeter power spectrum. So I don't need to talk about much about the HI 21 centimeter post radiation signal. So the idea is if there is a bulk density of hydrogen that which is completely ionized at the end of reionization and around epoch of redshift 6, and there is small fraction of HI that survives this process of ionization, is believed to remain confined in the small dense regions of the IgM. So there is CMB are coming, and there is these neutral hydrogen atoms now they have neutral hydrogen atom and CMB photons that coming, and there is a excitement of the hydrogen atom from ground state to first excited state, which emit a radiation frequency of 1420 megahertz frequency. And what we can observe is the quantity of interest is the differential brightness temperature is defined by this equation. So where the T gamma is the CMB temperature and Ts the spin temperature, and the additional that del V is the peculiar velocity component of along the line of sight, which leads to do the peculiar velocity in the power spectrum. So
you have 2 minutes, Chandrachud.
Okay, yes, I'm almost there. Okay, so here is the power spectrum, and the XHI is the mean fluxual density, and VT is the bias, which it's the ratio of HI 21 centimeter power spectrum to dark matter power spectrum, and beta is the redshift space distortion factor. We can see this is we have plotted for a redshift 1 of power spectrum of in K parallel and perpendicular component, and the color bar shows the order of temperature fluctuation in Kelvin. So you can see that estimate of this power spectrum comes from the redshift distortion parameter, and we'll put the error on this beta T using the power spectrum. So because of the estimate of this, the power spectrum is not spherical symmetric, but symmetric around the polar angle phi, we will consider the angle average the power spectrum given by the equation 5, and we write the variance of this power spectrum given by this, and where we where CS and CN is the signal and noise covariance matrix, and we again reduce the by factor NP, which is the number of we reduce the noise variance by factor NP, where NP is the number of visibility pairs in the given beam. And we'll for our consideration, we choose a observation of frequency and some Km into Kmax with 6 redshift beam, and we use the SCAR-MIT telescope specification. And each and every point we can we calculate the Fisher matrix using the expression, and the projection of these errors on ith parameter can be found from the Kramer bound relation FIA inverse under square root. And the interesting thing is the post reionization HI 21 centimeter signal can be only distinguish the FR gravity. This central line is for a fiducial model FR model of 10 to -5, and the lowest line is for lambda CDM. So we can found that this it's in the scale range 0.6 to 1.3, which can be measured with greater than 9% of sensitivity using 400 hours of observation with 50 independent pointing. So, and these error bars, how I mean, all the models merge to lambda CDM model at very high scale, and at smaller scale, however, this the 21 centimeter can be distinguished from lambda CDM model from FR gravity model. So this is the final conclusion of my presentation. So we found that scale dependent growth rate is about approximately 12% departure from lambda CDM in the redshift range 0.5 to 1.5, and where the maximum peak arises from around redshift 1. We found that greater than K.4 MPC inverse, the FR0 value 10 to minus 5 can be differentiated from lambda CDM with greater than 5 sigma sensitivity if we consider 6 K bins. And at larger scales, however, all these other models like 10 to minus 6 and 4 remains indistinguishable statistically from lambda CDM. And also, we can show that only 21 centimeter observation of force ionization epoch may only able to constant the FR theory, at least in relatively small scales. Finally, instead of constraining this beta T, redshift distortion parameter beta T, we put the bounds on the present day value of FR0. And to find this, we choose the efficient matrix in this form where lambda I and J are the dark matter, present day dark matter value and FR0 value. So we found that 1 sigma of 68% marginalized bounds on this FR0 value is in this order, some 10 to minus 4.38 to minus 5.62, and dark matter value from 0.32 to 0.31, which is very much competitive to other observational probes. And I mean, we can at least I can conclude that using the redshifted 21 centimeter signal with proper addition to the different cosmological probes, so we can measure the possibility of modification to gravity, whether the cosmic acceleration is due to from cosmological constant or something arises from modified gravity. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandrachud. So now we can take a couple of questions.
Maybe I can ask one.
Yeah, Suman, please.
Yeah. So hi, nice talk. So my question is a very nice question. So if you compare your constraints from 21 centimeter with the existing bounds that you have discussed in the first stage of your talk, how does it compare?
I'm not getting the question. Sorry. So,
no, you said that there are already some bounds from other observations.
Okay, so that bound is actually coming from the Wick Lansing peak studies. So there is so many other bounds are available, like Sunyaev-Geldovic clusters, and there are gravitational wave mergers. They put bounds.
How does they compare with your current 20,000 hour observation proposal?
I mean that I have in my paper I have listed all these. You can look into it. I mean, it's very much competitive with other.
Sure,
I mean, these constants are much tighter than us, but it's
okay. Thank you.
Any further question? Okay, if not, I can ask one question, Chandrachud. Yes. So you looked at F, and then you just calculate the difference that you have between lambda CDM and the FR gravity models, right?
Yes, yes.
Did you also look at the amplitude of the power spectrum? Because that depends on the growth factor, and growth factor will depend on what kind of cosmology you consider.
Yeah.
Did you look at that?
I mean, yes, actually, there is a power spectrum has the growth factor and Hubbles expansion rate. All these things are related to the what kind of model we are using. Right.
Right.
So of course it will, I mean, affect the power spectrum.
Yes. So did you look at that aspect, whether you can
that I have plotted the power spectrum contours are for FR gravity models only.
Okay.
That's not for lambda CDM model.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Chandrachud. So let's move on to the last talk of this workshop. Can you stop sharing? Okay, so the last talk of this workshop will be given by Urvashi Arora from IIT BHU. Urvashi, are you there?
Am I audible?
Yes, you can. Yeah, we can hear you. Please start sharing your slides.
Okay. Tell me whether my screen is visible.
Yeah, it's visible. Make it full screen because some part is not visible.
Okay.
Can you try to make it full screen?
Yes, yes. Okay.
Yeah, this is perfect. Yeah, please start your presentation.
Hello, I am Urvashi from IIT BHU Varanasi. I will be discussing about the observation of post-ionization H1 power spectrum using the strong gravitational lensing. So, as we all know that this picture describes the evolution of the universe. We are interested in basically the post-ionization era. That is the era of the galaxy formation and the assembly. And there has been several studies already done in this field. So from effect of nonlinear bias, redshift space distortion, etc. There also have been estimate of the observation time required to see that signal, and there are constraints on that it will be 1,000 hours of observation so that we can able to see that signal. And observational attempts to access the foreground effects and the systematics has been done using the GMRT at a redshift of 1.32 and 4.3. So these are all about the H1 signal. So I'm going to use the strong gravitational lensing. So initially, the enhancement of the H1 signal from the clumps of H1 in the post-ionization era by strong gravitational lensing was proposed by the Saini and Bharadwaj 2001. And after that, recently there is a 3.8 sigma detection of the H1 in the galaxy at a redshift of 0.4 by a lens, which is at a redshift of 0.095 using the GMRT radio telescope. So owing to the optical studies, at present level, there are several lensing potential have been modeled successfully in this last few decades. For example, by Johan et al. And Jejuek et al. So initially, invert interferometer measures the visibility. So which is basically the Fourier transformation of the fluctuation in the sky intensity. And that fluctuation in the sky intensity in our case is the containing the component of the fluctuation in H1 intensity and the galaxy foreground, diffused galactic foreground. And visibility correlation basically gives us the H1 power spectrum. So these are without including the effect of the lensing. So what happens when we include the effect of the lens? So when we include the effect of the lens, that fluctuation in the sky intensity is modified by that green function of the lens. And also due to that modification, that with lensed visibility function is also modified, which comes to be equal to the sampling function of the lens times that of the visibility without using the lens. So that sampling function is basically the Fourier transformation of this green function. Now, at this time, when we include the effect of the lens in the visibility, that with lensed visibility correlation gives us the sampling function square times that of H1 power spectrum. So to check the credibility of our formalism, we choose the 4 lens models corresponding to galaxy clusters. So these are parametric models based on the PI-EMD potential, which are widely used for the galaxy cluster lens. So the lower bottom plot basically gives the critical curves at 3 source redshift, which is 1.25, 1.5, and 3.0. So these trace basically the highest magnification region inside the image plane of the lens, image plane basically. So these two plot gives the fiducial 21 centimeter signal and the foreground signal. So, and this H1 power spectrum containing the terms corresponding to the complex bias and the redshift space distortion effect. So plot next, these two plots in the upper and lower panel corresponding to the lens at the redshift of 0.3 and 1.0. These basically corresponding to that how our H1 signal modified when we include the effect of the lens. So we can easily see that these two corresponding to lens at a redshift of 0.3 and 1, and these columns corresponding to redshift of 1.25, 1.5 and 3. So out of all the four models, this model M4, if we look it carefully, that is the more realistic one because that goes the maximum magnification, and that gray, dark gray line corresponding to the diffuse galactic synchrotron emission. And from these two plots, we conclude that lensing has potential to basically enhance the H1 signal. And also M4 is the most realistic model also at when lens is near to us. When lens is nearby, then the magnification is more. And last, it also has the limitation. In this, we can see that foreground is suppressed, but it is not fully suppressed. So again, that limitation is that sample variance is enhanced. Magnification only enhanced in the certain regions, that is basically in the small baselines. So due to that small regions, the sample variance is enhanced. We can illustrate it from the bottom, this lower figure, which is that area of observation is going to reduce at a particular magnification threshold. When the magnification value is increased, that area reduces. So since the area reduced, which eventually increase the sample variance. So given that this TOE exercise, so it gives us some confidence. So we next try to generate a lens visibility correlation estimator for the post reionization H1 angular power spectrum. So this is a previous slide in which we include the effect of the noise NU. So in our lens estimator, so interferometer basically sample the visibility in the baseline plane. This grid here VLI is the lensed modified signal measured at baseline UI, I corresponding to a particular baseline UI. We first grid the baseline space. Here for demonstration, we show only the 4 grids where visibilities are sampled. And the ELG is one independent lens estimator where in which VLI is the lens visibilities, and delta is the matrix which says that we are taking only the off diagonal element equal to 1 and the diagonal elements equal to 0. Rij is the square of sampling function. This estimator is which scales the basically the estimator, and this estimator basically gives us the this angular power spectrum inside the grid. After that, we average over the estimate of CL in all the grids in the annulus of L in order to evaluate the CL as a function of L. So now what happened when we evaluate its variance contains 2 major dominant terms. First term corresponding to the sample variance, which is equal to the square of angular power spectrum, and second term corresponding to the instrument noise, and that instrument noise, it depends upon the system temperature, integration time, bandwidth, and the frequency range up to which the signal remains correlated. So in this case, what happened when in second term, what happened when we take SL less than 1? So when SL less than 1, in that case, our second term dominates. Basically, second term enhances, but we want to reduce that term. So we choose a threshold value of SL such that lensing phenomena basically reduce the noise. So to incorporate this, we consider only those points for which that sampling function is greater than a certain threshold value. So in the next slide, in in here in this grid plot, if we see these brown plots, these brown points are those points having sampling value less than equal to 1. So sampling value less than threshold value. So we discard these points in our analysis. However, this reduces the sampling. So there will be a competition between the number of samples and the lancing threshold. So we choose, for this we need to choose a optimum value of the sampling threshold value. So for our analysis, we choose some some known galaxy cluster, Abell galaxy cluster with known lens models. So in the right hand side plot is basically between the area that is observed by a particular galaxy cluster and the redshift. This lower left hand side part is most good reason that that is basically that we can basically use to probe the H1 signal. So out of all these, we choose that a Abell 1689 galaxy cluster for our analysis, which lies at redshift of 0.18 and can probe a large region because it has a less value of U mean. So, and that lower plot is basically the caustic which are the maximum magnification region inside the source plane. So from this we can see that we can explore a larger area if we include this large number of galaxy clusters. So these are results when we doesn't include the effect of the lens. So these upper dash curve basically corresponding to the angular power spectrum, H1 angular power spectrum, and that lower line is the basically the sample variance term when we doesn't include the effect of the system instrument noise. And we know that in the absence of any lensing, H1 angular power spectrum is having very small magnitude as compared to that of that sample variance, and that is also illustrated in the right hand side figure in terms of the signal to noise ratio plots. And these all are using the GMRT observation with the observation time of 200 hours and a bandwidth of 64 megahertz at a source redshift of 1.5. So what happens when we include the effect of the lens? When we include the effect of the lens, the second term in a sample variance that corresponding to the instrumental noise will suppress large. So initially we can see that previous plot, it is up to close to 10 to the power minus 5. And now this value is close to 2 into 10 to the power minus, close to 10 to the power minus 7. So it is suppressed. So this is the advantage of using the lensing, that it suppresses the instrumental noise. So it is all these analysis at the sampling function value equal to 1. So next, when we include the effect of the sampling function, we increase the value of the sampling function. So initially the sampling function is equal to 1, the dispersion is more. But when we increase the value of sampling function from 1, 4, and then 8, and then 16, we see that the signal to noise plot is rises. Basically, it gives us some idea about...
You have 2 minutes.
Okay. Basically, it gives us idea that we can detect the H1 signal if we increase the value of that ST, or it is at the correlation value of 100 kilohertz. Basically, delta nu equal to 100 kilohertz. So these are 10 galaxy cluster that we choose from Abell list. So which gives us the best estimate of the signal to noise ratio. And from all these 10 galaxy clusters, these 6 galaxy cluster that are 1689, 383, they are the best chosen galaxy cluster, which gives us the more better result. And from these right hand side plot, we can see that we can explore the larger area up to 800 arc second, larger scale up to 800 arc second by using that if we use somewhat large galaxy cluster. So with this, I left with my summary slide, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So now it's time for questions.
maybe I can ask a very naive question.
Yes, Suman, please go ahead.
Yeah, so, sorry, Urvashi, very nice talk. So I may have missed this point. So this strong lensing measurement will measure H1, which is around the galaxy clusters or in between the galaxy cluster and observer telescope.
So it observe that is away from the galaxy cluster, that is not in between us and the galaxy telescope. It measure that is away from the galaxy cluster. So initially there is a, we can take it as initially there is a source, then lens, and then the telescope.
Okay.
Any further question?
May I ask?
Yes, Rajesh, please.
So in your previous slide, the error ellipse looks not ellipses. Actually, your error ellipses. So there is this. Why is this deformation?
I mean, I didn't get your question.
So in this error ellipse plot, your ellipse looks deformed. Why is that?
I mean,
Can I have a comment?
Yes.
These are not error. These are not error ellipses. These are the critical curves of these 6 lenses. There's nothing to do with error ellipses.
Okay. Sorry. So I just misunderstood. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Urvashi, I have one question. So yes. So if you look through lens cluster, how big the field would be? Because you want to measure power spectrum and you need to observe a large part of the sky.
Yes.
So if you because it is your sky is magnified, how big sky you can see at a time? The area.
That is illustrated from this caustic plot. At a redshift of 1.5, we can observe up to a scale of 800 arc second.
800 arc second. That means 12 minutes.
It will be 1 to 10 megaparsec, I guess, at 1.5. Probably. I mean, I don't remember the number.
Okay, at most, you mean?
Yeah, right.
Okay, so 1 megaparsec means that that is the largest scale you can probe.
Right. One is very small, but if you look at the caustics here, the critical curves here, so they will be the largest distance will be around 10 megaparsec probably. And if I don't, it will be of that order. I cannot tell you the exact number.
Okay.
The L here, so you can see that the L is like 2000 or 3000 is the lowest L. So that is.
Okay, 2000. Yes, in this plot it is 1. That means 1000.
Yeah.
Lowest. Okay. Thank you. Any further question? If no, then let's thank Urvashi and all the speakers of this session. And then, so this is the end of this session. And there is a discussion session. So Suman, when shall we meet for the discussion? At 3:35?
So Kanan, I have few announcements that I will do, and then I will announce for the break. Okay?
Okay, fine.
Okay. So hi all, this is Raghu, and on behalf Hello, can you hear?
Sorry. I muted you by mistake. Sorry, please go ahead.
So I will repeat this one.
Yeah.
So I would like to thank the speakers of this session for these very nice talks. And I would also like to thank you, Kanan, for chairing this session. I would also like all the participants of this session for participating. So with this, we are at the end of our talks of this workshop. In case you have missed some of the talks and want to revisit those, you can go and visit our websites of this workshop, and you will find the slides and videos there. In case you have further questions or anything to discuss, you can always do that in our Slack channel. And I also want to point out that we have another session after this one, and that session is completely dedicated to discussion of this session and future planning for this group. So I will like to request the speakers of this session to please be there to discuss the topics of this session. And I would also like to note you that we will not record the next session. So in case you want to take some notes from the next session, please be prepared for that. And I'd also like to request the speakers who haven't yet uploaded their slides in the Google folder, please do that so that we can avail those slides to rest of the participants. And some of the registered participants we could not include in the workshop. So we will forward those links to them so that they can check. And if they have some questions, they can always comment in the YouTube. And I will also request you in case there are questions, so you can discuss with them. In case you have any suggestions for us overall organizing this workshop and related to that, you can always email us about that one, a suggestion or feedback, whatever. And with this, I would like to stop, and let's take like 6 minutes of break, and let's come back at 3:35.